So good evening, everyone. I am Beth Swanson, CEO of A Better Chicago, and I'm so glad to welcome you to this special event tonight with Dr. Janice Jackson, CEO of Chicago Public Schools.
For now.
Yeah, for a few more days. So many of you know A Better Chicago, but for those who don't, we are a venture philanthropy in town, and we are devoted to fighting poverty in Chicago by investing in access and opportunity for young people across the city. And we've gotten to work closely with Chicago Public Schools and Janice for about a decade.
Yeah.
Personally, I've spent 20 years leading various initiatives for young people throughout Chicago. And I think we met about 15 years ago when you were starting Al Raby.
Mm-hmm.
So Janice and I have been along the road of many changes, navigating different challenges throughout Chicago's education landscape over the last couple of decades. So I'm so happy that you're here with us tonight. We don't have a ton of time together. I'm going to jump right into things. But first, we have some questions prepared. We also know our audience is going to have lots of questions for you as well. We'll make sure to spend time on that at the end. For those of you joining us online, we'll be collecting questions throughout the conversation in the Q&A function in Zoom. So please use that throughout, and we'll get to those questions towards the end. So to start, so you are leaving. You're leaving CPS at a time, pre-pandemic, that Chicago Public Schools has really experienced historic gains in student outcomes. Graduation rates have soared, academic gains at all-time highs, more students going to and through college. It's really a tremendous story. So when you think about it, I mean, it's probably slightly overwhelming because you've been along the ride the whole way. But what do you think is the major drivers of that success story?
Yeah, well, there's a lot to be proud of here in Chicago Public Schools, and of course that made the decision, the transition, that much more difficult. But when I think about it throughout my entire career, I feel like there are a few things. Number one, Chicago has always been bold and innovative in a way that I think sometimes we take for granted what we've been able to do here in this city. And I think a lot of that is attributed to, the leadership at the district level, with the mayor, the two mayors that we've had, at least during my time, Mayor Daley as well, and he did a great job. But I think that when I talk to my superintendent colleagues across the country, a lot of times people, they're in awe and they marvel at the way in which we approach things unapologetically and in bold ways. So I think really taking on policies that are for everyone. I think about my own experience as a Chicago public school student. I was afforded a lot of opportunities, but they were very selective. And I think when you look at where we are today, whether we're talking about post-secondary opportunities or now the launch of the new Skyline Curriculum, something that I'm incredibly proud of, the real focus has been around equity and making sure that opportunities are open to everybody. I think the principals have done a really good job. We've talked a lot about the role that principals have played in providing stability in our district and leadership and implementing these big ideas that we come up with. And then partnership throughout the city. I've talked oftentimes about partnerships with our post-secondary universities here in the area, CBOs, organizations like A Better Chicago, the Public Education Fund, and so on. There's a really strong ecosystem, and I think that Chicago is unique, and that's something that I'm hopeful will continue for decades.
Nice. Is there any one sort of, can you think of crowning achievement or, something that you're most proud about?
Well, I think during my time as CEO, there are countless things. So everybody knows my baby is Inglewood High School. I mean, I'm so proud of that school. I can't drive past without getting goosebumps and just thinking about the fact that we really were solving a problem that was just, terrible. Students in that community traveling the furthest to get a high quality education. And to see that we reversed the trend in 1 year. 90% of the kids were traveling outside the community to another school. And when you build and invest, people are coming back in the first year, they're overcrowded. Go CPS is something I'm incredibly proud of. That was like my first big enterprise launch. I almost got fired.
Yeah, thank you as a parent of three who had to go through that.
Well, I felt like it was my duty because as a principal, I was personally responsible for thwarting the 3 or 4 initiatives before because I felt like, when the district was rolling it out, like, no, we need to do this, we need to do that. And so when we were able to do that and bring all of the district schools and charter schools goes along. That was important. But one thing I haven't shared widely is the thing I'm most proud of, I think, throughout my entire tenure at CPS. And of course, during this time, I'm very, nostalgic and thinking back and sentimental about everything. And when I was a teacher, we had a debate team, and I won the championship. And this was at a time, I was at South Shore High School, at a time when it was, a school with a lot of struggles, provided a lot of opportunity, which I'm happy to come back to. But I remember winning that debate tournament, and it was just kind of like the, Bad News Bears underdog story, and we won. And there was a student named Talithia, and I remember at the end, it was like a movie, and I'm not lying, this is literally what happened, and this is important. It was raining, and we were like waiting outside, and like anybody that's ever taught knows that the buses will leave you. They don't care if it's raining. When they drop you off, that's it. So I'm waiting there for all the parents to pick up the students, and it's raining. This is why I remember it, because as a black woman standing in the rain, I was mad. But Talithia said to me, we were still just, so happy about winning. And she said, thank you for teaching me what I'm good at. And I remember that just lit a fire in me. And I feel like whether it was in the classroom, as a principal, even in my role as CEO, I was always looking to see what are people good at and how can I help them get to the next level? How can I bring that out of them? And to me, that was my most proudest achievement, but I think the fact that it happened, it really colored my path throughout the district. So
nice.
Yeah.
I don't think that's surprising to anyone listening that knows you, that you won the debate tournament.
Yes.
So, yeah.
Well, I was the coach, but I was behind the scenes.
That you got that done.
Yeah.
So as you look back, on the flip side, is there, it just feels like the work is never done, right? Is there anything that you look back on and say, if I had a magic wand right now and could just have that done, I'd do it before I leave? Is there something left undone that you'd love to?
Well, I believe deeply in the vision that we have created for Chicago Public Schools. I had a principal tell me, a couple of weeks ago after the announcement, she was like, I've been in the district almost 20 years. She was like, and there's never been a time where I believe so deeply in the vision that we have, and I used it for my planning. My teachers know this is a part, and I think that the vision is comprehensive, it's research-based, but more importantly, it lifts up the importance of equity and how to support our schools. If I had, I wouldn't say a regret, but if I had a magic wand or a do-over, I think the thing that I would do over is how we supported students with disabilities. That's something that, as I kind of unpack and think about my time here, that's a place where I feel like we could have and must do more. And so, my advice or, push to whoever comes next is to lift that up and take it to the next level. I wish we were able to do more.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's interesting. That's something we're grappling with around the diversity and inclusion of all students, all young people, holistic supports.
Yeah.
And so that's one thing, as Better Chicago does our work, and obviously we're on anti-poverty efforts and, thinking about issues of homelessness, housing instability, food access. Pre-pandemic, I think it was 1 in 20 CPS students experiencing housing instability.
Yeah.
Or, over 70% relying on food from the system. Last year, Better Chicago teamed up with CPS around, summer meals through World Central Kitchen. And even city colleges, I saw Chancellor, and 2/3 of students reported housing instability, food access issues, and under his leadership had opened food pantries at all the colleges. So how do you think about that as a system, like going beyond just a stellar education? Do you think that is something CPS is going to need to continue to take on?
Well, I think we've always played that role. I think it was more illuminated during the pandemic. I think if you have spent any time working in a school, you know that we do far more than educate students for 7.5 hours each day. But what the pandemic did reveal is just how many of our families rely on our schools, most of them for at least 2 meals a day, in some cases even more than that. And so making sure that students were fed, that's something our former Chief Operating Officer Arnie was responsible for and very proud of, and worked really hard through partnerships like you talked about to really bridge the gap, because I didn't realize we had so many people who were immobile, so we had to deliver food to them. But I think it went beyond that. One of the things that was lifted up during COVID is just the fact that a lot of people don't have access to high-speed internet. And of course, our motivation was to get that done through the Chicago Connected program, you know, so that they can access remote learning. But what we found is they were able to access so much more. Most of our families get information from the schools, and so they needed that to know what was going on. All of us were glued to the TV every day watching Governor Pritzker and the mayor do speeches. Maybe you tuned in to Cuomo for entertainment, but you know, we were doing this, and our kid, you know, a lot of our families were blocked out from that, and some of them weren't getting access to telehealth and other things that we all take for granted because we have so many resources. And so we learned a lot. I think it, you know, again, it illuminated the role that we play. I'm incredibly proud. Our principals were there throughout the pandemic. Our lunchroom staff, they were there throughout the pandemic. So many people really stood up and stood in the gap during this time. And, you know, we talk about essential workers. We celebrated them during the pandemic, but I hope people continue to celebrate and lift them up post COVID.
Yeah, so absolutely, it just feels like it's here to stay. A few of us were talking earlier, actually.
Well, I'm done with COVID. No, I'm just playing.
Yeah, no, the impacts.
Yeah.
But we were talking about the community schools effort and that sort of holistic, like opening the school doors again, and we, you know, would love to see that sort of come to fruition again.
Yeah.
So, you know, these, you know, past 20 years, I feel like, you know, we've seen a lot, navigated a lot when it comes to change on the education landscape, and I think this is one of them, you know, that's again, like you said, just been magnified. But from historic gains to, like you said, the swift shift to online learning and remote learning, and even more changes coming, right? We've got changes coming to mayoral control. We've got the legislation, the first elected school board in Chicago. You know, what do you see are the, you know, for maybe it's your successor, it's a question, you know, going forward. But with all of these shifts, what do you think are some of the biggest challenges facing them and in this landscape?
Yeah, I mean, definitely I can speak to what the next CEO would have to pay attention to, but I want to be clear, I'll be a part of that too. I'll still be here in Chicago, you know, as a parent and as a community member. I think we all have a responsibility to, you know, stand up and make our voices heard about what we think is best for our children in their schools, but also for the entire district. I think the biggest challenge ahead of all of us is student re-engagement. You know, I said this throughout the pandemic. You know, in a lot of cases it fell on deaf ears, but the reason I probably I just couldn't get over the fact that kids were out of school despite, you know, the public health emergency that was, you know, before us. It was necessary, but you know, there wasn't a single day that I woke up and I didn't think about what was really happening for majority of the students in CPS. And the images that you see on social media and on the news, that's not what personalized learning, what remote learning looked like for most kids in CPS. And so I think that it would be naive to think that once we open the doors back, they're gonna come up. I know after natural disasters, large portions of students never return to school. After Hurricane Katrina, I think 25% or a third of students never re-enrolled in school. And so there are real challenges. And so we are in the, you know, we've been working on this, partnering with CBOs, working with the mayor's office and, you know, different agencies so we can start to re-engage families. But I think that's going to be the biggest issue. I think the other issue is we have to have a break so that our teachers and principals can recharge. I mean, it has been difficult and it's been nonstop. And so, you know, we're focused on summer engagement and opportunities, but I also feel like people need a break so that they can be ready for the fall. And I think what happens in the fall is that we have to do a lot of work to address missed opportunities for learning for our students and figuring out how to reset and figuring out where to pick up. And people are gonna be in different places. Some students were able to thrive in this environment while other students didn't do so well. And so teachers and schools are gonna have an incredible lift dealing with that. On the political front, God bless the next CEO because they're going to have a lot of stuff to deal with. I think the biggest thing for me is around the elected school board. I have been 100% clear where I stand on this. I believe in mayoral control. I also know that an elected school board was in our future, and I think that the hybrid that we proposed was the most responsible approach to listening to what community members have said that they wanted, but also balancing the need to have, you know, just not have chaos in our district. I think when I look at the proposal now to see 21 members, that's 3 times what New York and LA have other large districts, and twice as large as our, other peers that have large boards. And so I think, as we look at the bill as it stands right now, the question is this the right approach? How do we achieve what I think parents want, which is more transparency, more representation, but also do it in a way where we don't create more problems? I'm concerned that there's nothing in there around campaign finance. There's nothing in there around staffing. The superintendent in LA, I'm quoting him, he said it, I'm not speaking out of school. One of the reasons that he walked away is that the board staff had more staff than he did. And so as a superintendent, you spend a large portion of your time on board management, which is appropriate, but I just think that there's a lot to be concerned about. I think that there is an opportunity to make it right and balance it so that all of the needs are met. And I think it's going to require communities coming together, raising their voices, and actually sitting down and coming up with a plan. The same way the district gets criticized for creating plans in back rooms or, without a lot of input, I would argue that that's exactly what happened with what was just passed a couple of weeks ago. Most parents don't know what just happened. And so I think we should make that clear. We should give people an opportunity to weigh in. If that board ends up looking like a single mom from Inglewood or a family from, Humboldt Park having voice on that board, I think it would be great. We know that past practice and what we see across the country, that's not exactly what it looks like. The Brookings Institute did a really good article, which I would encourage people to look up, to talk about who's on the board. And even with elected boards, the representation does not look like the students that they're serving. We have to do better, and this requires the bickering to stop, sit down at the table and get it right.
Yeah, well said. That's interesting you bring up LA, and I was thinking about LA, New York, Chicago, lots of CEOs / superintendents leaving, and in a change of, in a moment of change. What do you think about that trend? Or, what does that say about sort of what you said, the bickering and the representation, et cetera? Is that, a result of this?
Well, I can only speak for myself. I wouldn't, speak for other superintendents, but, people have told their own stories. I think everybody has a different way of looking at it. I would have loved to do this for another 5 or 10 years, but I do think that the work that's before us requires, new energy and ways of doing and thinking that, is a little different than the way I've approached the work. I also think that we've done a lot of great work. And, when I was talking to people, my tenure, as CETO and CEO, we had a fiscal crisis, the Betrayed series, 2 strikes, 5 million almost strikes. There's a lot. And then the pandemic. And so, I think that good leaders, when it's time. Regarding COVID, I think the pandemic, was interesting. And for me, it wasn't so much the issue surrounding the pandemic, having to stand up a whole new system of educating, all of the operational stuff we needed to do. I think mentally, kids being out of school for longer than they should have been is something that has been hard for me to get over, and I've been very transparent about that. And so that was the impact that COVID had on me personally. The bickering and the back and forth about it was frustrating, but throughout this pandemic, I've said this, nobody knew what to do. We figured it out every single day, and God bless the people who got up every single day and tried to figure it out.
Yeah. So many challenges, you just named a number of them. And so you talked about the engagement, the priority to put on engagement and re-engaging the families. Any other advice do you have for incoming CEO, what to tackle first? Or maybe it's the engagement issue is it, and maybe that's the number one, and are there strategies that you think can work on that? Yeah,
I definitely think that that's first, but I also think you have to do a few things in tandem. That responding to missed learning opportunities. We have a fabulous team that's still in place, led by Shirley Chavaria and Bogdana Chakumbova. So they have that, and I'm glad, that they're there and they'll be able to implement that. But I think the re-engagement piece requires a holistic effort from the city, and so we'll be creating a citywide campaign. But I think that, if you know that you're okay, and your kids are going to return to school and you understand that, I would ask people to find ways to engage and support other communities or family members, et cetera, to really understand how important it is that our kids re-engage in school. I also think pointing them to places to, educate themselves if that's needed related to COVID. There are still people who are very afraid to go back to school. So making sure they understand the science, understand the processes that we have in place to keep people safe, I think a lot of that will go a long way.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's interesting, the broader context that we're all operating in. I also think there's a lot of opportunity right now. And you think about the moment, thinking about the future of education. So, personalized and differentiated learning, access to technology in ways that has never been true for families.
Absolutely.
And hopefully equitable access to education resources in new ways through virtual and et cetera. So what do you think, to me it seems like a chance for us to really, restart or really create what could be versus what was. What do you think is the future in public education in general, teaching and learning?
I'll talk about CPS in particular. I think a couple of things. One, the Skyline Curriculum, which we've talked a lot about. I think we started working on that prior to the pandemic. It was great that we were moving in that direction because we were able to use some of the early tools in beta form, to support teachers who needed, lessons and stuff, and they were able to give us feedback. So when we launch it, which we'll do this summer, it'll be ready to go, quality tested, things like that. But I think we've moved away from this debate about should we be one-to-one and ed tech and all of those things. And everybody was thrown into the deep, and some people were ready and some people had to figure it out. But I think when we return back to school, we were going to spend a year to 2 years training teachers on how to, create flipped classrooms and do this, but they had to do it during the pandemic. So some of that can be accelerated. But one opportunity that has emerged that I'm really excited about is we're expanding access to early high school. And so right now in Chicago Public Schools, the only way you get access to early high school is through the academic center, or some schools have algebra classes. Because of what we learned with the pandemic, we can move forward. Okay, so in some schools it would be difficult to offer algebra, for example, or any course because you didn't have a Type 9 or certified teacher. We're going to create a virtual citywide program where hundreds of kids across the city, that may be 2 kids at this school in one class, 5 here, but I'm just super excited about these virtual academies and access to early high school. I think it's another, feather in our cap around equity.
Yeah, absolutely. And really could be a model. I mean, if you think about the access issues downstate or rural areas, I mean, if this can work, this could work anywhere.
Yep, and we're going to do AP as well. I remember working at Al Raby, we had a couple of AP classes, but there were some I couldn't offer. Now they'll have an opportunity where, if you don't have AP calculus at a school, you can take it online. And our teachers are really good at doing that because, they have 14 months of practice. So,
Yeah, fantastic. All of this is one of the reasons we actually launched the Chicago Design Challenge in partnership with yourself and CPS and the city. We also partnered with Urban Education Labs as well as Chicago Public Education Fund, and really wanted to find investments and organizations and leaders really supporting young people in new ways to try to get at all of the issues. No small task, right? You just named a million issues, but it's terrific, and that's part of the reason we're here today is to really announce our new 8 investments, which is so exciting. So I will name them: Alternatives Inc., Chicago Hopes for Kids, the Juvenile Protective Association, Leading Educators, Leap Innovations, Lions Pride Mentoring, Roosevelt University, and Vocel. So yay, I'm so excited.
Congratulations.
Yeah, so congrats, and excited to talk with everyone later. But we were truly just excited about, the possibilities of just where this could lead, and hopefully, proving some of these models out over the next few years could hopefully then scale to much larger, much larger scale. So thank you for your support in this as one of your final,
thank you.
one of your final acts. I'll ask one more question as we start to transition to questions from the audience. So while people are thinking, if you haven't written one down or if you haven't put one in the Q&A on Zoom, please do. But we also want to know what you're doing next. So
I don't have anything to announce right now. Go ahead.
just say you're with the Carnegie Foundation,
Well,
and just if you could give us a little insight into where we're going.
Well, a couple things. One, education is near and dear to my heart, so definitely want to do something related to education. Have to figure out what's the best next step. Definitely here in Chicago right now. Who knows, things will change, but I love this city and I'm excited about being able to just kind of step away and think and process this last year and figure out other ways that I can help. I mean, there are some academic pursuits that I like to get back to. Most people don't notice, but I wanted to be a college professor. That was my original thinking. And so I don't know that I'll go and do that. Not right now, maybe a little bit later, but I'd like to, poke around and take the things that we have done successfully in Chicago public schools and share them across the country. I'd like to spend time working with superintendents to help with advocacy. I think one thing that I learned during the pandemic is that there really isn't a place, there are places for to advocate for teachers and other principals and other groups, but there really isn't a place for people who really shoulder a lot, superintendents and their teams. And so that's something else that I'd like to spend some time thinking about. But I'm going to take a couple of months off. I've said that already. And my sister doesn't believe I'm going to do it. And she probably knows me better than anybody. But I promise you I'm going to do that. But I'll be around and I'll be focused on education. You can believe that.
Good.
Yeah.
Good. We need you to.
Yeah.
Not only here, but nationally.
Yeah, absolutely.
So one of our first questions is, how can youth serving nonprofits engage and support Chicago Public Schools with re-engaging youth after remote learning? So trying to help, but specifically really disengaged youth, the youth that are not coming back.
Well, there are two ways to approach it. I think summer programming and some of the other things that, I'm not sure which group, who wrote the question, but I think opening up your doors, making sure you're offering programming, it would be helpful if some of that is in person, because I think the more we get students out of their homes, I think the likelihood of them returning to school when we're ready to go back later in August, that'll increase. Our Office of College and Career Supports, is leading an effort around re-engagement. They'll be putting out some calls for people to come and support us with youth engagement. So if people want to formally partner with the district, those opportunities are on the horizon. I think the other thing is lifting up and amplifying the messages that are going to come out of this citywide campaign that I mentioned earlier. And then also just helping to be a voice. Again, trust and communication have always been important, but they became paramount in this during the pandemic. And so a lot of community-based organizations enjoy, high levels of trust in their communities. Mm-hmm. And so helping people to understand the importance of getting our kids back in school, helping schools in the district understand what people need in order to re-engage will be helpful. In particular with our students that are most vulnerable, this is a really hard nut to crack because there's just a lot going on right now. One thing that stands out to me is a lot of our high school students, both in traditional schools as well as in our alternative schools, are working now, which is a good thing, right? A lot of job opportunities are there because of the pandemic and the I don't know if you can say worker shortage. I know that's a whole debate, but there are a lot of opportunities out there. And really getting them to come back to school is going to be another challenge. So how do we create flexible scheduling so that students can continue their education, but also, keep the jobs that they have? I think there's a lot that they can benefit from that, but we obviously want them to finish school and go off to college or to some other post-secondary endeavor. And so I think that helping us with stuff like that and getting kids back in school is probably the most important thing right now, at least for the next year and a half. Yeah. Nice.
So in your 22 years, you've done a number of different roles, right? So teacher, principal, chief ed officer, CEO, parent. We'll leave parent out. That's obviously the most important one. But what was your favorite of all the different roles? What was your favorite one?
I can ask the crowd to answer that question. Being a principal, everybody knows that's the best job in the world. That's why I did it for such a long time. But it's the sweet spot. You know, you have authority to make a change. We have a lot of autonomy, something that we're really proud of here. We do allow our principals to innovate and to be creative. But kids are there. You have that connection. You know, I have loved this job, but I miss kids. That's why when you see me visiting schools on Twitter, I got the biggest smile. Like, that's genuine, because you don't get that every day. You working hard, sacrificing, taking a lot of crap. I did that as a principal, but then there were children there, so I remembered why I was doing it, and it didn't matter. So just like with your own kids, you go through stuff,
Right.
but to have and engage with them is important. So I definitely think principal is the best job.
Nice. It was fun to watch you do various principal roles. Westinghouse specifically was, you just, whenever I saw you, you looked so happy, just beaming like you are right now, walking the halls and you know.
So proud of both schools,
So proud. Any other questions, please write them down, or I don't know, Q&A from Zoom, I will ask for more. Again, sticking on principals, so the Public Education Fund you mentioned earlier, one of our major partners as well, and obviously in this city, you know, that's also been an interesting conversation around what's going to happen with that sort of role, and I know there's some legislation even talking about principal redefinition, et cetera. Do you think, you know, all the work you've done there is going to be able to be sustained over time, et cetera? It's just obviously such a critical role. I mean, leadership in general is obviously in any industry, but that role particularly.
Yeah, in the work that we've done here to develop principals, whether it's through, you know, recruitment and placement or training and role, Chicago has been recognized nationally for that pipeline. And so I think that, you know, we have to maintain that. We have to fight for that, because I really believe that it's one of the key ingredients or components to the success story that we've had in CPS. I mean, it's no secret, we've had transition in leadership at the top, yet, you know, parallel to that, we have this story about academic progress and progress in the social sector as well in our district. And it's been because of what happens at the school level, and that's largely due to the work we've done with the fund to support principals. When I first started, I think the retention rate was about 75%. It's over 90% now, and that's by design. And so what that means is that students know who, you know, is going to be students and families know who's going to be leading their schools. If an initiative starts in a school, you can see it through. And so that kind of sustainability and stability is important. I think what I have concerns about with some of the legislation that was talked about or on the horizon is that if principals are not in managerial or supervisory roles, it just seems like we're getting further and further away from having the type of accountability that should be present in the school system, that our kids deserve. And that happens naturally in certain school systems where you have a lot more parental involvement. We have to make sure that people are, you know, held accountable for what happens to our kids. And a big part of that is making sure that there's leadership at the school level who feels that they have the autonomy to make decisions to move the work along. So I hope that, you know, it didn't progress. I hope that it doesn't. And I think that that's another thing that more community voice needs to be brought into the conversation.
So as we pursue academic recovery, this is a question from the audience, how do you think CPS and the new CEO can help whole child development remain at the center?
Yeah, well,
it's not just academic recovery.
Yeah, I think, well, we have a strong foundation. So in all of our efforts through remote learning and even the hybrid that we did and re-engaging our students for the fall, or planning for reopening in the fall, I should say, we have thought about academics as well as SEL in the same breath, because we know that they go hand in hand. And Chicago Public Schools, I think the progress that we've made over the past 10 or 15 years was because we didn't just focus on academics. We ramped up our SEL, and I've said this. I was converted to SEL. You know, in the beginning, I thought you take a hard line and discipline, and you do this, and we have trained a new generation of leaders who understand that if you support students from a social and emotional standpoint, that they are healthier, that they come to school ready to learn, they come to school open and accessible to learning in a way that we didn't really think about that in the past. And so when you look at our plan for recovery, we're spending a lot of money on academic interventions and support and acceleration, but we're equally investing, if not more, in SEL. And we just recently launched our Healing Center District Framework. Again, something we were working on prior to the pandemic, but it was accelerated because of COVID, and we'll be launching that this fall. So we're really excited about that.
Yeah, and when we've been working together on even the design challenge, that was your team saying we need to go beyond just, it's not just academics. And so all of the investments I just mentioned go much beyond. It's not only reading and math, and it's not just high school success, but it's social emotional, it's trauma-centered care. So
and I would even say even the work we've done around early childhood and just bringing students in sooner, keeping them in school longer, making sure that they have more opportunities so that it's a well-rounded and fun educational experience. I think we've done a lot in that regard, and I just hope that the new leadership is able to take it to the next level.
It's funny when you say fun. It was like when my sixth grader got to go back to school. It was like he was dancing in the kitchen.
That's
so happy to go back. And actually, it was how was school, and it was all about recess.
That's good. That's very
It was all
important.
about being able to play again, and they couldn't touch each other. They didn't, so they played shadow tag. That's as they jumped on each other's shadow, just
for like 2 days.
For 2 days, exactly. But at least it was all about play and interaction and engagement. So we have a question on SEL and just that the role likely, obviously, being even almost more important now. Yet school schedules often do not build in sufficient time, for reflection on par with instructional time. So it may be unbalanced, or is it something that you feel like should be built in?
That's what I was about to say. I think the worst thing you can do, any teachers out here listening, is to have SEL time alone, or it's just like ACT prep time. Like, if that's the approach, you're only going to get like a quick jolt, but you're supposed to infuse it into everything that we do. So with the Healing Center framework, one of the components is training our teachers on a few things. One, how to identify signs where, if a student may be struggling and needs access to, something more than what may be provided in the classroom or through a school counselor or social worker. We want to train them so that they're equipped to do that. Train them so that they can infuse this into the classroom. There are, little things that you can do to make students feel safe and whole in a classroom. And our teachers did a really good job with remote learning related to that, because I think that it opened up another dimension that we were, we just didn't have a lot of visibility into. What is it like? The students had to open up their homes to us, and our teachers had to really figure out how to navigate that. And so I don't think that there's a right balance, and I'm never going to be a proponent of taking away academic time to just do SEL for kids in Chicago and in the inner city when they're competing with students who spend majority of the day on academics. We have to figure out a way to do both, and that's why training our teachers through the Healing Center framework is the approach that we're taking. But I'm not going to take away math or science or the arts when I know that they need that to have a holistic educational experience.
Another question has come in. How would you recommend to lift student voice in the future direction of the district, and particularly regarding equity and just ownership of learning?
I think we have a great start and foundation. First, the Student Advisory Committee, through our partnership with MICFA. They probably wrote that question. I'm just joking, but I love them. That's like they just feed me. And what I love about it, it's obviously an opportunity to work with students, but students are so honest. Like, we don't waste a minute in those meetings. Like, they come in, they're talking about real issues. They don't have an agenda. It's like, this is a real problem in my life that I experienced today, and how can we fix it? And when you give them the tools and they feel like they have more agency, you can just see the growth over time. I had a student who, Meredith, I hope she wouldn't mind me sharing this, from Lindblom. She wrote to me and said that being a part of Student Advisory Council allowed her to speak up. She's Asian American, and said that she found it hard to talk about those issues. And because of what happened in the Student Advisory Council, it really gave her the tools to lift that up. And when those concerns became more public this year around the AAPI community, she felt more empowered and emboldened to do that, when, she said 2 years ago, that's a place where she would have probably taken a step back. There are countless stories like that. the student voice committees that we have in our schools, the work that our social science department is doing. We have a good foundation, but we have to take it to the next level, and it starts with, and again, I've been converted, because when they first told me the term, I'm like, I don't believe in that. Adultism, that's what they told us. And they said, you know, we adults, we tokenize students sometimes, we bring them around, we listen to them, but we don't really listen to them. And so how do you allow them to have voice? How do you treat them like adults? Like, one of the things they know is I push back on them the same way I push back on my team. I'm not gonna let you say something that doesn't make sense because you're a student and I wanna be nice. I'm gonna push you to defend your idea, and a lot of them stand their ground, and they have real reasons why they do that. And I think more adults, we should do that to students. And it happens in the classroom, that happens when students are planning events. So I think we have a good foundation, but we obviously have a lot more work to do. And I think as a district, bringing them in when we're creating projects and plans. We do it, but again, it's usually at the end. The best example is what we do with our student code of conduct. It is now just built into that process that students weigh in, and that's why our student code of conduct is one of the most progressive code of conducts. I don't even think that's the term anymore, because of our students. We included a Bill of Rights because they said, all you're telling us in here is what we can't do. You're not telling us what our rights are. And so there are, you know, countless examples like that where they have shaped district policy, but they're too far, and you know, we don't have enough of them, I should say.
What would you advise principals, we're going back to principals, to do to build on the parent engagement strengthened this year when students return to person?
Yeah, well, you know what, that's actually a good question, because when people ask about the pandemic, we always talk about all the bad things that happened with the pandemic, so that's a great reminder. Parent involvement was probably one of the biggest, like, benefit, I know, in a good way, and like one of my favorite stories, or not just a story, but it happened time and time again. This made me proud as a CPS, you know, educator. A lot of parents said to me, I can't believe they're teaching this in this grade level, but in a good way, not like in the past when it was like, oh, you should be teaching this and CPS isn't offering that. I heard from countless parents from schools across the city, different types of schools, that they were really impressed with the acceleration of the curriculum. And I think all of us can speak to that. You know, they're reading books that we probably read in high school a lot sooner, introduced to, you know, more difficult concepts. I think we should continue to leverage technology. When we have meetings, you know, if we had a meeting and 100 people show up to a district meeting, that was like a good meeting, right? It looks like a big meeting, but what we learn with technology is you can turn that on and then you can have thousands of people come to a meeting. So I think rethinking engagement, making it easier and accessible for parents to engage is something that's critically important. And I think meeting people where they are. I think what we've learned during the pandemic is to have more compassion and understanding for one another on both sides. So I heard parents say, man, you know, teacher is teaching, and I see the kids in the background, and you realize that people have full lives. And similarly, you see students and families and, you know, how they live, and, you know, maybe they're two generations in the home and what that, you know, so I think we have more visibility into one another's lives, and I hope that that leads to more empathy and compassion and just more unity.
Yeah, from a working parent standpoint, it was to be able to attend all meetings and not think you're missing, and actually it was a whole new ballgame for just me personally, but I did get to experience sex ed via Zoom in 5th grade, so that was interesting, and they did a fabulous job, and actually it's come a long way, and so I had to go through that.
Well, shout out
but
to
anyway, shout out to the
student
entire
health
curriculum,
and
the health and wellness.
That's a great, first of all,
totally different. It's amazing.
That department is amazing, and they carried us through COVID, so I have to give Dr. Fox and his team a shout out.
I would not have gotten that insight from my son if he were just reporting out for the day.
Yeah, well, imagine being the CEO and looking like, they're teaching you this. No, I'm just joking, but it was a lot. But
it was very well done.
Yeah, it is. It is very well done.
Okay, so other end of the spectrum, or the little guys, but thinking about post-secondary, you know, and you know, what ideas do you have around creating direct pathways, you know, to careers or, you know, to college, 2-year, 4-year, and beyond? Yeah,
well, of course, I'm very much open to looking at a lot of different opportunities. And I think that's, you know, underscored through our Learn, Plan, Succeed, where we're really making sure that there's a handoff between high school to some post-secondary endeavor, and we are encouraging students to explore all of those things. But it's our job as a school system to prepare them to go to college. They will make a choice about which direction that they want to choose, but we have to make sure that they're prepared in order to do that. What I'm also proud of is the way we've kind of shifted and changed the paradigm in Chicago around city colleges. You know, I know you're on the board, the chancellor's here, and the chancellor may remember this. I remember early on going to our counseling and post-secondary team and saying, it's in our interest to make this a stronger partnership. And the minute Juan was announced, he's told the story a million times. I sat down and said, here are the 10 things that we have to do. And we have made good on a lot of that. And you know, through figuring out, you know, that our students, a large majority of our students are attending city colleges, so we have to work with them. It's in our best interest to make sure their programs are as strong as possible, that we prepare our students so that they can be prepared to access the curriculum and courses that they offer. And I feel like we've made a lot of progress in that regard. College preparation is the North Star, but I do want to encourage kids to look at students, I should say, to look at other opportunities. I think a next step, in a place that I know CPS is focused on, is really strengthening our career and technical ed programming. More work-based learning. We were right on the cusp of announcing kind of a big initiative, and then COVID happened. So I won't get ahead of any announcements on that, but I will say to the business community and folks here in the city, we will be calling on you to provide more opportunities for our students.
So, you know, it's interesting calling on us for opportunity. We have a question about, you know, that we all know that a thriving public education system really benefits all of us. But when you're not a parent or you're not directly an educator, you know, it can be difficult to know how best to support Chicago Public Schools. You know, what do you think or recommend? Like, how can, you know, people support the system and its success?
Well, first, CFF, the Children First Fund, is an amazing organization, and some of our representatives are here today, so they're back there, and whoever wrote that question, you can talk to Mike or Rachel. Sorry, shameless plug. But no, we have a separate 501c3, and what's great about CFF is the work is aligned to the vision. So if you look at the vision for Chicago Public Schools, in addition to us lifting up equity, we also lift up ways that people can support the district. So they have an amazing website. I would encourage people to take a look. I would also encourage people to join the local school councils. You can join as a community member. You will learn a lot, and I think that will help. And I think, again, as we prepare for our elected school board, that might be a good way to start learning a little bit more about the governance model that we have in the district, and it's a good way to contribute.
So perfect lead into this question is, how do you think an elected, you'd think we've planned this, but how do you think an elected school board, both hybrid and fully elected, will affect both governance and on the ground learning?
On the ground learning?
What's happening in the schools. Do you think, you know, is it...
Well, I'm not sure if it'll have an impact on local school councils. That's actually another area where I think more conversation needs to happen to see what's going to be the impact there. I think from a governance standpoint, I think if it's done well, and I think that there's time to get there through, you know, multiple revisions to where we are now, I think that it could lead to even greater equity. Again, if done well, more voices at the table so that the interests of all the people in the city are taken into consideration. That's the dream and the promise. What I'm afraid of, and I hope I'm wrong, is that, you know, it'll look like a lot of these other boards where you have kind of the reform community versus the union. And, you know, you have people who may fall into certain categories, parents, you know, community members, et cetera, but they're representing different special interests. And so whatever legislation we have, if an elected school board is to be, that's probably the place where they need to spend the most time figuring out what this looks like. How do we put in guardrails so that, you know, campaign doesn't get out of control? I think, you know, I don't even know how much it costs to run in LA.
It was over 11 million.
11 million.
I think it's up to 15 or something.
15. I mean, that's crazy. And I think the other thing is right now the bill that we have is not inclusive. If families who are undocumented are not allowed to participate, I think that is a shame. 47% of our students are Latino. Not all are undocumented, obviously, but we have a large share of students across different backgrounds who are undocumented, and they have essentially been told they can't participate in this process. And so if the goal really is transparency and access and more representation, you can't leave out a large group of students who are already being left behind because of the structures in this country. You can't create a new system. How can we create a new system where we know we're leaving people behind? It baffles me that it even made it as far as it has. Baffles me, I should say.
Yeah.
Yeah.
More? This is a quick one on this one. Should the next CEO be from Chicago?
I think everybody should be from Chicago, but it's just a good place. You know, it's really an open race. I keep saying that because this is Chicago, and people are like, who's the new CEO? I know you know. I'm like, no, we don't know. And I think the mayor should be commended for the process that she has in place. We've never had a process like this, and I think that's why people don't believe it's a process, but it really is. And we had thousands of parents sign up, which is, again, another thing that just made me feel like, all right, this parent involvement, the movement we have around that is great. And, you know, they got to participate in focus groups, and people spoke passionately about what they want for their schools and the community. So I think that it should be the best person to do the job. I think it needs to be somebody who cares about communities, cares about equity for real. And I think if you aren't from Chicago, you have to understand that it is a city of neighborhoods, and that I think that's what a person from Chicago understands more intuitively than someone who's not from here. And if you don't live here, you have to learn that and be conscious of that, because you can make a lot of missteps if you just don't understand the different nuances and things like that. But no, I'm not going to say it's mandatory, but will I cheer a little louder? Probably so. Yeah.
That's great. So we are going to do a quick sort of fun round before we break for the evening, because I figured since you're leaving public office, right? You can give us a few real opinions on some
What's
things.
My favorite? No, just joking.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, exactly. So, well, first of all, if you hadn't become a teacher and then, educator extraordinaire.
Yeah.
Was there another job? Like, was it?
I think I said it earlier. I mean, what I initially wanted to do was to be a college professor. I think if I had talent, I would love to be like Beyonce or something like that. So, but that was never going to happen.
Perfect.
But if I could just push a button, I would be Beyonce.
I wouldn't put it past. Wouldn't put it past you.
That's it.
Wouldn't put it past you. Put your mind to it.
Yeah.
Okay. Your favorite go-to restaurant in the city of Chicago, and if you have to be slightly politic, you could do like a favorite North Side, South Side, West Side.
Oh well, yeah. Then I'll start promoting family and friend businesses and stuff like that. Well, my favorite food is pizza, and it's not just because I'm from Chicago. That's my favorite. So I think go-to, one of my favorite restaurants actually is La Scarola. I actually should have said that. I love that restaurant. And we went there just on, I'll use a little slang on a humbug. That means you just ended up in there. It was just wild. And it's the best Italian food I've ever had. And so that's my favorite restaurant that, a lot of people know about, but not everybody knows about.
Yeah, so pizza then. Mm-hmm. Thin crust or deep dish?
Thin.
You already knew it was going to be already answering.
No, because that's like the argument I have with my daughter every week, because she likes the deep dish, which I think is crazy.
Yeah, it's too much.
Yeah, it's too much cheese, so we fight every week about that. But I like thin crust.
Okay, I know the answer to this, but White Sox or Cubs?
White Sox. You already know that.
I did know that.
You do know
All
that.
All right, so Mayors, Lori or Rom? I'm kidding. I'm joking.
Harold Washington.
Yeah.
That's my favorite mayor. No, both are great.
All right,
I'm still going to be living in this city, so I know how to answer the question.
All right. All right. And to end with, what your favorite day as CEO? Was there any day that just stood out to you as like, this is what it's all about?
Huh? Oh yeah, there were so many great days, but Inglewood ribbon cutting, I'm just trying to think of like a day that started off really bad and I would have to think about it, but the ribbon cutting at Inglewood and at Bronzeville Classical, that was a very emotional day. I think that was probably my favorite day.
Yeah. Fabulous.
Yeah.
Well, I want to thank you, Janice. I could ask you questions all night, but just for taking time for this discussion, thank you for your friendship and your partnership
Thank
over
you.
so many years. And thank you for decades of service to this
you.
city. City's a better place because you have been a leader in it. So I truly mean that.
Thank you.
And so we all know this is not the last time we're going to see you, and you said you're going to be around,
I'll
so
be
we
around.
expect that.
Yeah.
And at various Better Chicago events, expect to
I'll
see
be
your
there.
smiling
Yeah,
face.
good.
But I really do want to thank everyone for joining us, the people who are here and online. And please, if you want to check out more about Better Chicago, but more importantly, the Chicago Design Challenge finalists, please go to abetterchicago.org and learn more about their incredible work and what's happening in the city. So thank you.
All right, thank you. Thank you, Beth. All right, good. We got you.